guys, welcome back to Primer Podcast. My name's Jessica Flake, back with Pete Stearns. Excited to get into this week, and so let's just dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Final week of our Simple Living series, where we're looking at just practices that we can implement in our lives that open up margin for us, that refocus us, that root us again in the goodness of God. And so this past week, we're doing a fun one. It's celebration. And we're looking at celebration in three different ways. We're looking at celebration through a lens of gratitude, celebration through a lens of Sabbath, and celebration through a lens of worship. And one of the things that I reflected on is that feels unnatural for us because celebration is almost always tied to a reward or an accomplishment or something like that. And when it's not, it feels uncomfortable. And I think you told me that you have a pretty funny story of where celebration maybe was not tied to a accomplishment and felt a little uncomfortable.
Right. Well, it was tied to a specific age. So I was turning 16.
Okay.
And my dad loved to embarrass me.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so we were on vacation at the beach, and I remember the restaurant's name was called No Name.
No name.
Restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah, No Name Restaurant. And so, like I said, I was turned 16, so very teenage, right in the middle of my teenage years. Yep. And
very aware of others.
Very aware of others. And so it's it's August, pretty crowded evening at the beach with all the tourists.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize it, but my dad told the waiter that I was turning 16. So the waiter was like, "Oh my gosh, this is a big birthday."
Big deal.
And so not only did they sing to me, but they made me stand on my chair.
Okay.
And they got the entire restaurant to sing.
Like every 16-year-old girl's dream.
Oh my gosh. It was the most embarrassing thing that I think he did. There's a few more, but that was probably one. But just that celebration.
It feels a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit.
It is. Yep. But yet that's what I will say it did make me remember that time. And so
well, and I think that's the funny part is I think back on so many key moments in my life that I can remember, and they all tie to some sort of celebration. And so I think it can feel uncomfortable in the moment because it's focused on us or doesn't seem to fit the accomplishment or the reward. And yet it marks these pivotal moments in our life that become these core memories that we hold forever and ever. And I love in Philippians chapter 4, Paul's invitation to the church that's experiencing poverty, that are not experiencing circumstances that merit celebration, his call to them to worship. Do you mind reading verses 4 and 5 in Philippians? So Philippians 4 through 5.
Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near.
Yeah. It's just such a simple invitation, and yet it's something that is so easy to neglect in this world that kind of pushes back against celebration a little bit, that doesn't want to, have this fanfare that doesn't seem merited, but it's reorienting. It's saying, when do we rejoice? Not our accomplishments, not when we have beginnings or ends or moments that are meriting it, always.
Yeah.
And who are we rejoicing in? It's not in ourselves. It's not because of something we've done. It's because of the Lord. And I think there's a beautiful kind of element there. And I think, so practically speaking, one of the best ways that we can rejoice always is just through the discipline of gratitude. And I've found this to be really impactful in my relationships with people, but also with God, is to mark each night at the end of the night to say, hey, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for? And so sometimes it's like in a specific context. So what are 3 things I'm grateful for in my marriage? What are 3 things I'm grateful for with my children? What are 3 things I'm grateful for at St. Mark's Community Church? Right. And it's trying to reorient how I'm thinking about those things. And in other places, it's how am I grateful for God? How am I grateful for the basic provisions? Like, we live in this culture that tells us that we need more, that we don't have enough, that like our value is not inherent to us or tied to what God has done for us. And yet at the same time, we're living in a world where 46% of the global population is living on less than $5.50 a day. That's $2,000 a year. And it's like, even at its total base, we have so much to be grateful for.
Right.
And so there's that first part, that's that intentionality. But then the second is in the Lord. And there's this invitation, I feel, to the practice of Sabbath. You've been on retreat the last few days, and Sabbath has been something you've been sitting in. So what are kind of some of the reflections that came from your retreat on the practice of Sabbath and how that might tie to rejoicing in the Lord?
Yeah, I think that one, I think Sabbath has been misunderstood a little bit in our probably our past cultures. There's some thoughts of like, well, that was Old Testament, New Testament. You don't have to do that. Well, and I think that's not at all what is we're supposed to do. And like our God, He took a rest. And so why would we not? And so I know I started making it a practice to take Sabbath on Fridays. And so like the time and
we won't tell anyone that we're recording
today's
this on
Friday.
Friday.
I know, but that's the thing is like to make allowances for that. And like, so if I can't do it on Friday in this week, I'll do it on Saturday.
Yeah.
And so like, but to be intentional about it. And it always restores my and grounds me back to being grateful.
Yeah.
Because if I just go, it gets me into the rhythm of feeling like what I'm doing is for the Lord, but I end up being so busy and so worldly minded, even doing good things. And so I feel like my Sabbath day and my time of solitude, my time of silence, it grounds myself back to Christ, and it reminds me to be grateful. And of like you mentioned, I was on a retreat the last few days, and like just these smallest little things as I was in solitude, like it started raining, and I was watching a bird just bathe in the raindrops, and it was just like, how often do we go by these moments so quickly and we don't watch what God has right in front of us?
Yeah, it's, I mean, and I think that's a powerful, example of what Sabbath does in reconnecting us in relationship with God. I was listening to a teaching by Marty Solomon, who hosts the Bema podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts. But and he was talking about Sabbath, and one of the pieces he was talking about was that Sabbath was, in effect, this invitation to date night with God, right? Where the 10 commandments that are given by God are not actually a list of rules, but instead it's a vow being made between the scripture calls God the groom and we're the bridegroom, right? We're the bride of Christ. And he says that this vow to keep the Sabbath day holy is an invitation to create intentionality, to spend time with God. And that was a big shift for me. And maybe it's just me living in this kind of like perfectionist, get things done world. But so often I've seen Sabbath as like a period of necessary rest that I need to take in order to do all of the other things. Right. And so that puts me at the center. Like my energy level is the focus of Sabbath. And so I can say, no, I'm fine. I can just keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. But that changes it, because now it's saying, hey, because my relationship with God is so important, I'm going to spend time with God. Like I think about my relationship with Brittany, and we get in these busy seasons, right? And we just miss each other, and we're, two ships passing in the dead of night. And why do we have date night? It's not because we need a rest. It's because we need relationship. We need to connect with one another in the midst of the busyness. And so I put on hold the things that need to get done because this is important. And I think that's this idea of Sabbath that has kind of hit me like a ton of bricks this week, is like, oh, like the Sabbath rest isn't just about my energy. Yes, it is. There's a part of that, but it's also slowing down enough to be able to see God in the raindrops and the bird, where it's like, oh, I've connected with God now in a way that I just couldn't in the busyness. So yeah, I love that Sabbath is this rest is a different kind of rejoicing. It's a different kind of celebration, and yet it's this foundational practice. One of my favorite parts in this passage is the impact of rejoicing is this gentleness, right? It says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, and I will say rejoice, and let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near. And I find that even more poignant when you read it within the context. So I'm going to read Philippians 4. I'm going to read the first few verses here. So 1 through that verse 5. And we're going to be looking at this conflict that's happening in the church of Philippi. And I just want your kind of like initial reactions to that conflict. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. So just context, Euodia and Syntyche are two core leaders of the church of Philippi, right? Okay. We know of like 6 leaders. Euodia and Syntyche are 2 of them. Lydia is another one of them. A slave girl is another one of them. And so this church is built upon the leadership of these 6 leaders, these 4 women, and they're in conflict with one another. What sticks out about how Paul addresses that conflict to you?
Well, he talked about one mindset and it being on the Lord.
Yep.
And so like he didn't reprimand them for their conflict, which he could have. But yeah, what he was saying to me, it sounded like he was saying, put aside that your differences and what you've been what has been troubling you, basically, and remember that you are all together with God. And so that is that's who we are as a body, and like we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And so like that is what connects us. And even in conflict, even if we do not truly understand, well, not that we don't see eye to eye, but trying to understand, and because we're made in the image of Christ, and being that should always connect us, no matter whether we see eye to eye or not.
Yeah, I think in so many ways, when we are in conflict, right, we have this feeling of like, I'm on this side, you're on this side, and I'm pulling you to this side to be with me, or this way, or maybe we're meeting in the middle, right? And it's like we're resolving the conflict. And Paul doesn't seem any concerned with the conflict itself. He doesn't say what it is. And also, he's the moral authority. He could fix the conflict right then. Like, it's Paul, right? Of all people, he's the one in charge at this point. But he doesn't say, okay, you do this, you do that. Instead, he draws them not together like this, but together like this, right? Where they meet at Christ. And that is a different way of engaging with division and brokenness that I think we need to be reminded of in the world that we're living in today, is that so often we're just in this back and forth, pulling this way. And instead, in celebration and worship and rejoicing, we're drawn together into Christ. And that's going to look different for the world around us. I'm drawn to this picture of the Grinch, right? He steals Christmas from the Who's, and he expects them to be fighting and bickering and yelling at one another. He's sitting out in like this sinister way at the top of the mountain, waiting for the chaos that he has caused. And what happens? They start to sing, right? And in their singing, he thinks something's different here. And his heart grows and the whole 9 yards, and it's this redemptive story. But I think in a lot of ways, that's the picture of what Paul is talking about. The world is dividing us, right? The world is seeking to drive wedges in between us as believers, in between us in our culture with non-believers. Yeah. And they're sitting back waiting to see the chaos unfold. And I worry that we are pandering to it, right? We're just yelling louder, shaking our fists, fighting. And in this space, I wonder if we could be encouraged to say, hey, what if in the midst of that division, we didn't yell back and forth, we didn't point fingers, we didn't try to convince one person, but instead we just said, hey, you know what? In the midst of our division, we're committed to celebrating, rejoicing in the Lord, and we're drawn together this way, in a way that people see us and they say, man, there's something different. The gentleness is evident to all. And I love, Paul in Acts chapter 16:25, right? He's in prison in these circumstances where it doesn't make sense. And what happens? He and Silas are singing in their jail cell. And it says that the other prisoners listened, right? There's something beautiful that happens when we resist the temptation to react in the chaos that the culture around us creates, the chaos that sometimes we create for ourselves, right? And instead root ourselves in a worship of God. And I think celebration has the power to really break down a lot of those barriers and those walls.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys get to talk a little bit about what celebration and Sabbath and the gentleness of coming together looks like for your group and in your individual study. We'll see you soon.
See you soon, folks.